Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, founder of the modern Musar movement, once noticed an elderly shoemaker working late into the night by the light of a small, flickering candle flame. Rabbi Yisrael approached him and, after engaging in some conversation, gently critiqued the man for working so late into the night. The cobbler listened patiently, but then answered back and said words that changed Rabbi Salanter's life. He said, "Rebbe, as long as the candle is still burning, there is time to make repair." As long as the candle is still burning. Our Parshat this week, TZAV, the second in the book of Leviticus, begins with the instructions for the burnt offerings. They were to stay on the smoldering altar all night long, all the way through until the morning. The Torah was so concerned that this Tamid, this ever-burning flame, should stay lit, that we are actually reminded strongly and very unusually about it twice, right in a row. In Leviticus 6, verse 5, we read, "The fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. Lo tichbeh, it shall not be extinguished." And then right after, in verse 6, "A permanent fire shall remain aflame on the altar. Lo tichbeh, it shall not be extinguished." Lo tichbeh. The fire should not ever go out. How do we do that? How do we stoke this fire? How do we keep the flame of tradition alive? We can look in many directions, and one of them is to look to the mystical tradition. We look at Kabbalah, which put forth an idea that every human being has within him or her a soul. It's actually, believe it or not that old of a concept in Judaism. It took centuries to develop. And the Kabbalists evolved this idea of the soul based on the construction of the ancient tabernacle. There was an outer area where the world came in and went out, an inner area for the priests, and then the innermost area, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go. That was the place where God's Spirit was said to dwell most intensely. And they made an analogy to the human being. We have the outer region that interacts with the world. The inner, our lungs and our heart, where the blood pumps and keeps us going even when we're asleep. And then the innermost place where our soul dwells, where we say that is the God place, the place that is like the Tamid, the fire that never goes out. It is ignited at conception and stays with us our entire lives until we go to the next world. All the way through, that ever-burning fire is what makes you, you. It gives you the opportunity to contribute to the world something no one else can bring. It's the place that we need to remember, is the place from where we give our own unique gift. And that gift is wanted, it is needed, it is crucial. But where do we go to offer that gift? Since we're talking about sacrifice in this part of the Torah, we're thinking about going somewhere, perhaps. Well, to state the obvious, we're all rather stuck. And yet, for the moment, as we shelter in place and do the healthiest, safest activities possible, the words of Martin Buber are especially profound. Martin Buber, the absolutely singular 20th century philosopher, theologian, and teacher, was the foremost distiller of Hasidic teachings to audiences that were unfamiliar with that way of life and thought. In his treatise called The Way of Man, he he addresses the question of where do we go to access the great treasures of ourselves and of the universe. And he says so elegantly, there is something that can only be found in one place. It is a great treasure, which may be called the fulfillment of existence. The place where this treasure can be found is the place where one stands. For we let God in the place where we live a true life. If we maintain holy interaction with the little world entrusted to us, if we help the Holy Spirit to come into that section of creation where we are living, then we establish in this our place a dwelling for the divine presence. That strikes home, quite literally, this Shabbat before Pesach. Many of us are not where we thought we would be for Passover. We might feel that the warmth, the flame of Passover is diminished because we cannot celebrate the way we normally do and with whom we normally do. But every act that we do, by the mystical approach, by the Hasidic approach, even by a halachic approach, by a traditional approach, every act that we do is part of keeping that flame alive. The Haftarah for this week, which doesn't always pair up with TZAV, but it does because it is special before Passover, it makes a beautiful suggestion of how we can help keep the flame burning. And it seems so small we might skip right over it. The Haftarah is from the book of Malachi, and he teaches us that in the face of those who reject the values that we hold so dear, who transgress openly and escape punishment, who in other words threaten to extinguish the flame that we have tried to maintain for so long, Malachi offers us this corrective. It's chapter 3, verse 16. Then the righteous people spoke to one another, and God listened and heard, and they were written in the book of remembrance. Such a small act. Harder right now than it normally is, but in some ways easier. The people spoke to one another. That's a place to start. We need to talk to each other in every way that we possibly can. We need to embrace this technology, pick up the phone, write, text, sing, Zoom, the verb and activity of the year. When we keep these channels of communication open, we continue to stoke the fires of communication. We need that so badly right now. And on Passover, in these next few days, even if this holiday feels completely different, the continuing acts of Passover keep the flame alive. Most obviously when you light your candles this coming Wednesday evening. If the night before you are in the practice of collecting and burning the chametz, the leavened bread that we may still find in our homes, of course those are obvious ways that we keep the flame alive. But if you grind and eat some horseradish and shed some extra tears this year, in the sweetness of the charoset, as you chop walnuts and grate apples to mix together, if you dip parsley in salt water and take an extra long taste of the matzah, every time you do that, in Kabbalistic thinking, you are releasing sparks of light. And when you do all of these acts this year, think about that for a long moment. We have a little extra time, such as it is, and that's a gift in its own way. Every act of Pesach you do this week, alone, in community with family, virtually, every act releases a spark. Quite literally, it stokes the flame of spirit and of our existence. Embrace each act. Know that it counts. Even if you do it alone, and especially if you do it alone, you are not alone. We are all caretakers of this flame together. Of course, the story about the cobbler is not about shoes. We learn from this simple cobbler, and in those stories, there's no such thing. There is no such thing as a simple person. Everyone is profound and deep and wise and has something to share. The cobbler reminds us that as long as our fire is still lit, we can make repair. We can make tikkun. Tikkun olam, repair of the world, and tikkun hanefesh, repair of the soul. As Passover approaches, please keep the flames alive. Lo tichbeh. May the fire of Judaism, the love we have for our tradition, one another, and for the Holy One, may that flame never be extinguished. Shabbat Shalom.